Welcome to Under the Radar, a show about independent iOS app development. I'm Marco Arment.
And I'm David Smith. Under the Radar is never longer than 30 minutes, so let's get started.
So today we wanted to talk about having to remove features of the apps. And this is, I've done this a lot over time. So a lot of times it's kind of questionable whether you really have to remove something. It's kind of a blurry line of are you removing something because some condition is changing or somebody is forcing you to remove it, or are you removing it because you don't like the feature anymore, or it's too hard to support, or something like that. And I've done a lot of both, honestly, more the latter than the former, honestly. But I think what I'm facing this summer is I'm having to remove the send to watch feature from Overcast. This is a feature that would use the iPhone app to transcode the podcast file to a smaller size, and then bake in SmartSpeed, and then send it over Bluetooth to the watch, and then the watch would have its own local copy of the file, and then it could play the file directly from the watch to a pair of Bluetooth headphones if you were out running with the watch or something and didn't have your phone with you. This is a feature that people had requested for ever since the first watch came out. It was the number one feature request from watch owners, was the ability to have standalone playback, playback without your phone. And basically, and this feature, it took me a very, very long time to get this working. I worked a lot on it this past winter. I've probably invested something like 3 or 4 months of development time into just this feature. And the main problem I kept facing was the background audio playback APIs on watchOS are very, very rudimentary, because watchOS has to run on this very, very low power device. And one thing that basically doesn't exist in watchOS is background execution of apps. A few can do it, mainly workout processing apps can do it, but almost nothing else on watchOS is allowed to persistently run in the background the way audio apps on iOS are. On iOS you have audio playback, VoIP, you have location tracking, like turn-by-turn directions. All these kinds of apps can stay in the background indefinitely. As long as the user is using them, they can keep staying in the background. On watchOS, that list is much shorter. And notably does not usually include audio apps. And so there are a few APIs you can use. The biggest one is the WK Audio File Player API, but it's very, very rudimentary, and honestly, I've had a lot of problems and shortcomings trying to use it, a lot of bugs, a lot of just missing features, because the way it works is it actually is out of process. You basically hand it a file URL, and it plays, and then your app gets terminated in the background. And then, at various times, your app could be woken back up again to be notified of stuff going on in the audio player. Maybe, if you're lucky, or if the user interacts with you, you'll obviously wake up for that. But otherwise, you're kind of you're not running. And that makes it very, very hard to make a good audio playback experience, especially for things like podcasts that have to be resumable, that have to save your position, stuff like that. For months, I was fighting these APIs. I could not get a good experience out of watch background audio playback. The problem was not sending the files over, although that has its own problems of things like it's very, very slow. There's no way to detect the progress of a transfer, which is very, very bad for the user experience. But even if you can get past the transferring of the files, or even if you could have the watch download the files directly over Wi-Fi or over maybe a future cellular connection watch, you still would have the problem of background audio playback on watchOS. And so what happened was, this past spring, an app called Watch Player by Peter Knapp came out, and it uncovered for me a new method. Basically, if you said you were a workout processing app, you could use AV Audio Player and use it directly, and your app would stay running all the time without interfering with other workout processing apps. It would just do the right thing. It would do what you want. It would stay in the background as audio was playing, and allow you to do things like save your position reliably and not have to deal with all the out-of-process bugs of WK Audio File Player and stuff like that. It didn't have any kind of weird interaction with remote controls or the now playing screen, which is part of the problems I have with the WK Audio File Player API. It has a lot of weird interactions there. Anyway, so this was finally a way to fairly reliably play audio in the background on watchOS. So I switched over to this method and I released this feature. And it turns out that this was not intended to work this way by Apple. And so this feature, it no longer works this way in watchOS 4. watchOS 4, you can only, if you want background audio playback, you can only use WK Audio File Player. All the method of saying you're a workout app to really play audio, that no longer works on watchOS 4. So now I'm faced with this massive dilemma of, well, I can go back and rewrite the whole thing again for WK Audio File Player, the out-of-process API. But that had a lot of problems and a lot of bugs and a lot of shortcomings and just weird behavior. Like, for instance, it tries to hook into the remote control buttons. So if you were to hit skip forward or seek forward on a Bluetooth headphone, or if you were to go to the Now Playing screen and hit the fast forward button, what that does for WK Audio File Player is what you'd expect from music. It goes to the next track. Podcast apps all interpret this as seek forward by 30 seconds or whatever you've set it to. So for podcasts, what you want is very, very different than that. And when you are controlling the audio player and you have a proper remote control API like you do on iOS, you can interpret that as whatever you want, and you can do that. On watchOS, because this is all happening out of process, out of your control with WK Audio File Player, watchOS tries to do the right thing. So it just invalidates that file and seeks to the next one. If you are a podcast app, you don't have a next one, or you might have used the WK Audio Q File Player or Audio File Q Player, whatever it's called. But you have no way to interpret that click as something else, or that fast forward command as something else. So it just ends the track you're listening to and goes to maybe the next podcast or whatever else. And I tried so many crazy hacks with this. So, for instance, splitting up podcasts into like 10-second chunks and just giving it a queue of like 400 files for a show.
Perfect. What could go wrong, right?
Yeah, unsurprisingly, watchOS did not appreciate that approach for various resource limitations. I think it probably didn't expect me to have a playlist with 400 entries of 10-second files. So yeah, that wasn't great. And so again, like I tried all these hacks to try to get this WK Audio File Player to give an experience good enough for podcast listening, and basically it just didn't happen. It didn't happen 4 months ago, or it didn't happen for the 4 months I was working on it last winter, and I've tried over the last few weeks to do it again, and with watchOS 4, and it's not any better in watchOS 4. It still has all of these same shortcomings and all these same bugs. And yes, I have filed many radars, and I have forwarded them to evangelists and things like that. But the fact is, like, background audio playback, I don't think is a very high priority on Apple Watch compared to like everything else they have to do. Like, Apple's very busy this time of year with things like iOS and getting the new phones out and all the new stuff for iPad and everything. So while I have filed bugs and contacted the appropriate people, I don't think these bugs are going anywhere. Basically, the beta season is almost over, and they haven't gone anywhere. So I wouldn't expect them to. So I'm faced with this decision of like, do I move to this new API, which is much worse for my purposes in every possible way and way buggier, and introduces all sorts of new problems and requires all sorts of crazy hacks like using a timer and polling things that are supposed to be KVO compliant but aren't, stuff like that. Like, just a lot of bugs and a lot of weird workarounds that you have to do, polling things to see if they're playing or if they're stalled, because sometimes the is playing attribute is wrong. Like, there's all sorts of problems that I can't even overstate how many problems there are with this API. And so I can switch to that, but it's going to be way, way worse than it is now. And right now, the feature is barely shippable as it is. Like with the watchOS 3 version, that was barely shippable, and I probably shouldn't have shipped it, but I did. Or I can remove this feature now and just say, sorry, everyone, it didn't work out. And this is complicated. Like, some people have said, like, well, I'll just leave my watch on watchOS 3. Well, that's not going to work, because first of all, if I leave this feature in for everyone else, when they upgrade to watchOS 4, it stops working, even if I don't recompile the app for watchOS 4. And then second of all, if I update my app to iOS 11 and watchOS 4, then if their watch is still on 3, it'll just be deleted from their app when they update the phone app. So they would have to also not update to iOS 11, and that's unlikely, So anyway, I'm basically stuck, and I have to remove this feature. And this is really a tricky decision, because the good thing is not a lot of people use this feature. It's used by something like 0.1%, according to my analytics, of active users. So it's a very, very low number. But that 0.1% is going to be really mad. And I've tried to warn them on Twitter ahead of time and say, hey, just so you know, I've been working on this, not going well. But I've decided it's really out now, and I'm going to remove this feature. Like, the decision is made, and I'm also going to remove it like now rather than in a month and a half or whatever, whenever iOS 11 ships and watchOS 4, because I don't want my entire iOS 11 updates story to be a removal of a major feature, and I don't want all the 1-star ratings that I'm definitely going to get by removing this feature to apply to my big iOS 11 update. I want to get this out of the way now, and I want to kind of stop the influx of new customers finding this feature and getting accustomed to it, only to have it be ripped away from them in a month and a half or whatever. So I'm going to remove this feature now, and it's always a very tricky balance, because again, it's like you have to think about all these things. Like, you have to consider, you're definitely going to make a lot of people angry. You're definitely going to get a lot of 1-star reviews. It's going to hurt the app for a while, but the feature wasn't very good to begin with, and I've been getting 1-star reviews over the current feature as it is today, even from people who love the rest of the app, but they want this feature to work better, so they say 1-star for the whole app because they're mad at this feature. So, it's... what should I do? Does this sound reasonable?
I think it does, because I think the reality in a situation like this is that the biggest things that come to mind is, at a certain point, there's the sunk cost fallacy that you have to deal with, of that feeling of because you've put so much into something that you should put more into it to save that effort that you put into it before. Mm-hmm. So in this case, the thing that I'd always have in the back of my mind is am I continuing to work on this feature because I've spent months working on this feature, or does this feature still make sense in and of itself? If I was coming at it fresh. So you have to have that in the back of your mind. And then two, it's what is this feature getting in the way of being made? Because it's especially as a one person developer, or even a small team, you're the one thing that you can't get more of is time and attention to work on your app and to make the part of the app that 99.9% of your other users interact with better. And so the biggest things, it is so hard to say, to just accept the fact that this is going to be unfortunate, that this is not going to be pleasant for who knows how long. For, it could be indefinitely problematic for that very small group of people, but hopefully it's, for a month or something, or for a couple of weeks when, the update comes out where this gets pulled. But the reality is, trying to please that small group of people indefinitely, trying to sort of pile hacks on top of hacks of this crazy feature, is just never going to, it's never going to win. And so you kind of have to at some point just say, we tried it didn't work, I'm very sorry, and move on, because otherwise you're just, the app is just going to get stuck. And it's in a weird way, it's the reverse of the sunk cost fallacy. Is you start to think in terms of should I have pulled this project earlier? Should I, would it, and what could I have done in the meantime? And, it's not that you want to just, only slightly try experimental and interesting features, and if soon at the first sign of trouble, back out, because, a lot of the cool and interesting things that differentiate apps and make them useful and interesting are these kind of more experimental, going down these crazy routes and seeing if it can work and coming up with interesting workarounds and, crazy hacks. I love that part of things, but I think at a certain point you have to decide, does this continue to be worthwhile? And it sounds like in your case, I absolutely agree that it's time for it to go. And it's just going to be one of those things where they will, you can work on the messaging around that. You can try your best to kind of message that, and maybe you'll end up maybe having messaging in the app to try and communicate that, because the majority of your users almost certainly aren't, following Overcast FM on Twitter or whatever, or reading your blog. Like, messaging that as best you can to try and make sure that, people are at least have some understanding about what's going on. But ultimately, it's like the being held hostage by a vocal minority is just going to stall everything else out. And if anything, the best thing is to do is to just call it quits. I like that you decided to do it early and this cycle, just get it done and just put that to the side so you can focus on your next big updates for iOS 11. Because once you've done it, the nice thing in many ways, at least. It's a funny thing to say, but one of the things I like about the App Store is that, like, it's not like I work in a physical retail store, or something like that, where if I do something that my customers don't like, they reach out to me specifically in a physical way that I can't avoid. Like, if you do something that'll upset some people, you can in some ways isolate yourself from that and just move on, at least for a period of time, let it die down, and focus on the things that are going to make your app better for everyone else. Because almost certainly, that is better for the future of the app than trying to hold on to a feature. And in this case, your hand is kind of forced. But I mean, there's even situations where you have to make, any change in an app is going to have this exact same experience, I think. Like, if you change the font, or you change the color, or you change the layout, people will be upset. Like, there's just, that is the inevitable reality of any change. But if that change is making the app better, then it's kind of essential to just develop a bit of it's like I struggled with this a lot in the early days of my indie career, with this feeling very personal about it. But at a certain point, I've had to just develop a thick enough skin to say, whatever, I'm trying to make the app the best app that I can make it, and just go with that, and hope that people accept that, the majority, it's making it better for more people is always almost certainly better than leaving it as it was for a small group of people.
This has been a lot of my rationale for choosing to remove this feature now, because I have, the sunk cost fallacy is definitely at play here, but I think what you just described, and what I will now, I guess, coin the lost opportunity cost tragedy, that I could have done so much more for the main app in the time I've spent on this feature. And if I would have known this feature would have cost so much time, I probably wouldn't have started tackling it in the first place. But that's all gone now. Now I just have to focus on, well, what do I have now? And the fact is, I'm already more than halfway through the summer, and I have done relatively little to adapt the main app for iOS 11 because I keep getting stuck in watch problems. And developing for the watch in general, as you know, better than probably anybody,
it's complicated, and
it's slow going. It's a very, because it is, first of all, this kind of sister device to the phone. So it has you have to do a lot of things through the phone first, and then over the Bluetooth or Wi-Fi to the watch. And it also is very, rudimentary performance hardware, because it has to fit in a watch. It has to have the power envelope to fit in the watch and everything else. So it's very low powered hardware. The OS is fairly young. The APIs are fairly young and very limited. So it's just very slow going development wise. Everything you do to develop for the watch is more difficult and more cumbersome. The cycles of developing and testing and debugging are all longer, just because it's this low power thing that's complex and tied to your phone. So watch development for me has just been a massive time sink. And a lot of my users do use the watch app, but way more people use the watch app than whoever used the Send to Watch offline playback. And part of that, the feature could be better. I'm not saying it was perfect before, but it could be way better actually. But the fact is, it is not worth investing as much time as I've been investing in the watch app for the amount of usage it gets. Still by far, I have something like 15% of my users who have the watch app installed, but only about 1% of the daily actives actually interact with it. They have it running in case they need it, but very few people actually use it. or interact with it more than just looking at it or glancing at it or even just having it installed and never launching it. So I need to now adjust my time allocation for the reality of the usage of the Watch app and how expensive time-wise it is for me to invest time into it. Like as I said, like it's just so slow going to make real progress on the watch. It's difficult and it's expensive. So what I need to do now is focus on the main app, the main UI, the main interactions people actually do with it, because that's what I'm focusing on for iOS 11. This is no secret. As we discussed, I'm adopting the new drag and drop APIs. I'm updating some of the UI, here and there for various like little behavioral tweaks that people have wanted and stuff like that. So like I have a good amount of work still to do. All my table views in iOS 11 have weird animation bugs and are broken because of the way they changed table view sizing and everything. I still haven't started dealing with that yet. Because I haven't had time. So I keep losing time to massive, tar pits of watch development. So I just need to end the watch development now. And it's okay. Like I'm going to maintain the app and update the app over time, but it has to be a small scope. It has to be like this watch app will continue to work, and I'm going to make it as fast as I possibly can and even faster to interact with, which, by the way, is actually better without the offline feature, because then I am back to a one-page interface and I don't have to link all these extra frameworks and everything, so it actually is way faster without the offline playback, and it's easier to touch it without your touches being interpreted as swipes, so that's nice. Anyway, so like the Watch app is way better without this feature, and it's more in line with the amount of time it has earned from my development time for the usage it actually gets. Like for those 1% of people who are interacting with it every day, I want to make it really fast, because 1% is not great, but it isn't like if I leave it without the offline playback, it isn't that big of a time suck. But that does not make it worth investing half of my development year into it when the rest of the app needs attention too. Anyway, we are sponsored this week by Indeed Prime. Indeed Prime helps tech talent such as yourself and other software developers and data scientists simplify their job search and land their dream job. Indeed Prime candidates get immediate exposure to the best tech companies with just one simple application to Indeed Prime. Companies on Indeed Prime's exclusive platform message the candidates with salary information right up front, and the average software developer gets 5 employer contacts and an average salary offer of $125,000 a year. Indeed Prime is 100% free for candidates, no strings attached, 100% free for you. Sign up now at Indeed.com/Prime. Once again, Indeed.com/Prime. Thank you very much to Indeed Prime for sponsoring our show.
So the thing that as you're saying that also comes to mind, I think just in general, is the being aware of the trap of how we allocate our time as we work on our apps, because this is something that I've actually been struggling with a lot recently, and I have like the double fold problem of where do I allocate my time within an app, and then where do I allocate my time within a variety of apps that I have.
Oh, of course.
And I think this loops back into the sort of this topic around removing features, because it is so easy to get stuck in these rabbit holes, I find, where you're working on something that isn't actually giving you a lot of return. And I think it is so like the traps that I am so easily fallen into are ones where you get like the feedback we get from our customers, whether that be in email or online, in the app, in the app store, wherever it comes from, we get this feedback, and it's so easy to misconstrue the representativeness of that feedback. And I think like in this case, it's like you had this feeling that you had a lot of people requesting offline watch playback, like from their, it was a highly requested feature since the watch came out. Great. Turns out 0.1% of people actually used it in practice. Right. Like, and I think that is something that it's like the best way to remove a feature probably is to never add it in the first place. Which is like preemptive removal, which doesn't dig you out of the situation you find yourself in now. And I mean, the reality is, you're just going to have to, it's like you just have to navigate it as best you can. It's out in the world. But I think to wrap this up, the thing that comes to mind for me is I'm increasingly trying to be very analytical about where I'm spending my effort to try and maximize the output from that, because otherwise I end up spending time on these apps or on these features that, I get the impression are very desired, but the reality is they're not in the common case. They're these edge case users or uses of the app. Or honestly, even more problematic are the ones where they change the core functionality to be slightly worse to make a custom or a special use case slightly better. Like those are the situations where I think it's very important to, when we're going into these kinds of things, it's like to take that step back and say, like, how many people realistically are going to probably use this? And do I have any measures in my app that I can use to identify that? Like, even just at the basic level of like, what percentage of my apps of users in this case, like have an Apple Watch, and like knowing that number ahead of time, like that is the absolute, if every single person used it, well, that would be this many people. And like you can go down that road of being very thoughtful about it ahead of time, because otherwise you end up in this situation. And I've gotten myself in there many times myself, where it's so easy to get sucked down these things that can become these like you think you said tar pits. Like that's what it feels like sometimes. And almost certainly we're at our best when we're able to move quickly, when we're able to focus on features that will, if we can make that core experience better and better and better. And it's like the refining, having the attention and the patience to refine that core experience over and over, and being okay with letting other opportunities fall to the side. Because I think, I don't know if you ran into this, but what I often run into with these kind of these side features is I have this fear. I guess it's like the fear of missing out. Like I don't want to be. It's like I know this opportunity exists. Like here's this functionality. Here's this thing that I could build. In this case, building offline watch playback. Like it's a known thing. It isn't this crazy novel invention that you've come up with. It's like it's a pretty obvious next step. It's like, is it getting over the fear that someone else is going to do it? Someone else is going to do it better. And as a result, like they're going to have this runaway success that crushes you in your business. Like
that's a constant fear of mine.
But the reality is that is almost certainly not the case. Like it's possible, like in the same way that it's possible to like win the lottery. And in some ways the odds are probably more similar. It's like, there's a 0.01% chance of that situation happening. But the reality is the far more likely thing is that your app would lose out and fall away because the core experience got worse over time, rather than that it didn't have some one little feature. And like, that's really hard. Like having to say no to something that I know that I can do, but just would end up being this massive time suck is really hard, but it's probably an essential thing for us to do, because otherwise we're just going to, like, I don't know what the next feature that you or I are going to add to our apps that we're ultimately going to kind of regret and maybe have to walk back from and have to navigate and take our lumps when we remove it. But almost certainly those opportunities are going to keep presenting themselves. And we just have to try and focus on the right things.
Is this all your like subtle, long way of saying that you want me to bring back One Touch Playback?
No. That's fine. I'm okay with the 2-touch.
What about the play button on the right side? Is that good enough?
Play button on the right side is perfect.
Okay.
Yeah, but it is an example of like it's that core experience of Overcast, like optimizing the behavior of playing a podcast is like a core experience that should be perfect.
Yeah,
and that's where you should be spending your time rather than worrying about the side features that a few people use, a few people love. Like they're maybe super passionate, and that's awesome, but that's not most of your users. And going down that road too far is just going to end up, missing out on way bigger opportunities than missing out on this small opportunity over here.
Not to mention, I got to fix all my broken table views still.
That too.
All right. Thanks for listening, everybody, and we'll talk to you next week.
Bye.